Okay, so the Gemara in Yevamos on Daf Ayin Ches. Yeah. So says the Gemara. Shlosha simanim yesh ba'uma zu. There are three telltale signs of the characteristics of this nation, referring to the Jewish people. Harachmanim, the ones who are merciful. The habaishanim, the gomli chasadim. Baishanim, I mean, it's difficult to give that a translation, as we'll see. But let's say for purposes, let's say just to simplify it, like, let's say bashful, perhaps. The gomli chasadim, and those who do good deeds. So focusing on the middle one, the source for this, Baishanim. Baishanim dichsiv ba'avor tiyeh yiraso al penechem levilti techato. That's a pasuk from Shemos. The pasuk says, "Vayomer Moshe el ha'am al tiro ki leva'avor nasos eschem ba ha'elohim uva'avor tiyeh yiraso al penechem levilti techato." Is referring to the reaction of the people when they were at Har Sinai and they heard God speak, and they see the lightning, and they're hearing the shofar blast. And it's a very scary, intimidating experience. And it says vayanu merachok, that they all step back in trepidation. So Moshe tells them, he says, listen, you don't need to be afraid. God isn't showing you in order to intimidate you, but rather he's putting you through this experience, va'avor tiraso al penechem, so that his fear will be upon your faces, which is an interesting way of phrasing it. You could just say, in order so that you have fear of God. What does it mean, on your faces? So what that means is that there's an emotional characteristic ingrained in the person, that they have this sense of yira, they have this sense of awe, and perhaps even fear is the right way to explain it in this concept, in this context. That there's a certain element of bashfulness. Bashfulness meaning the shame that keeps you in check. Let's say self-awareness and inhibition. Self-awareness and inhibition of going beyond boundaries of appropriateness. Now, what's interesting is that this is highlighted as one of the top three signs that indicate the Ummah Kadosha, right, the holy nation. Like these three qualities are supposed to manifest themselves. The Ramah famously says in the opening sections of Ibn Ezer that there are certain characteristics that if a person doesn't express them, you have to question that he's possibly not Jewish. Yeah. So it's not the same qualities that are being discussed here, but be that as it may, like these things are taken very seriously. There's some type of, at least cultural and perhaps deeper than cultural, perhaps deeply rooted in our collective experience, that these are the expressions of the Jewish people. And one of the top three is this term baishanim, that they have this aspect of baishanut. Now, so contrasting this is a well-known mission in the very beginning of Maseches Avos that says lo habaishan lamed. If you want to be smart, you want to really progress in life at all, you can't be a baishan. Right? That's a little bit more intuitive. Like if you're shy and don't speak up, then you're going to remain ignorant, and that's a pretty straightforward idea. Yeah. So on the one hand, you have baishan as one of the great qualities of the Jewish people. In the other context, there's baishan is saying you got to suppress that, you got to get rid of that baishanut, because you're never going to get anywhere if you have the baishanut. So I've been thinking about that, and I think that the resolution to understanding these two contrasting ideas is what emerges from the letter mem. And I'll just tell you before we start, I found this letter particularly challenging because it's very complex, as we're going to see. It's very complex. And I feel that there's less clarity in terms of what the takeaway is at any level. Forget how to act it out, like what musar to apply in your life and make yourself a better person, which tends to be a challenge here anyway. But even just at the purely intellectual level, I think it was very challenging. And for the past several weeks or months at this point, we've been making an intention to try to extract something that is concrete and applicable. And I found it very, very challenging with this. And I was really ruminating over it for a while. And I think I came to a conclusion that was at least satisfactory for me, that I think I think is really, at the end of the day, the powerful takeaway from the theme of Os Mem. So we'll jump in without further ado. Uh, Os Mem, Mizigata inyanim hametsuyarim zeh b'zeh. The Mem embodies the Mizigah, the putting the flowing together. I don't know if there's a good term for Mizigah in English. Blending. There you go. Thank you. That is, so I'm corrected. That is exactly the word, and it has to do specifically in the context of liquids. That's how it's used. Like limzog et hayayin, to blend the wine, means that they would water down the wine to the point where it was, you're able to drink it. Because back then the wine, they had a process of dehydrating the wine so that they would be able to transport it easier, more, excuse me, more easily. So you would add more water in order to make the wine palatable. So the mizigah, the blending of the tziyurim, of the forms, has taken place with the mem. Shatfam haklali, their flow, their general flow. Achar shehuchlalu, that they become integrated. Tzurotem apratim beshetef haklal agadol, with the general flow of the collective. There's already this imagery of water and liquid and flow is very, very emphasized. Ha'atid la'asot ma'amar shalem, which comes into the form of a complete statement. Mehamon nekudot machshavtiot. So interesting. I think that he's actually using ma'amar not in like a localized word, but more like a statement, as if it's almost like a proclamation. Like a proclamation is a series. It's not just one word. It's a series of words, and it's a series of sentences, and it's a series of paragraphs. You want to communicate an idea fully, you need to kind of long form write it. And if it's a good statement, if it's a good ma'amar, then there is this sense of flow. There's a sense of flow. You it starts in it has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end, and there's a clear progression. So all the different forms are flowing into this general message. Kol ela yigalem lanu hamayim bebituyo hameimi. The mayim, mem, has this connotation of water, right? Kind of like means water, mem and mayim. I'll just skip a little bit forward over here. There's a quote. This is a quote from the Sefer HaBahir, which one of the very, very early mystical works from the time of Chazal. So the quote says the following: Umay mem. What is the significance of the os mem? Al tikri mem. Do not pronounce it mem. Elam mayim. Mayim. So the mem embodies this water-like quality. Halimudim mitgalmim hitgalmut machshavtit. All of the learnings they begin to take form in conscious thought. Chonim ish al diglobet zirehem. All of the different forms have now become independent. Mitgabrim kol echad bechugo, and all of them have become strengthened in their own particular place. B'shitato malchei idialav v'razehem. I just need to comment. You'll see throughout this thing, he has a lot of interesting word games that are going on over here. And we've spoken about this before, that Rav Kook probably was one of the biggest contributors of taking English words and inserting them into Hebrew usage. So a big word that he's always using is idea or ideali. Yeah. So here he's taking the English word that he's put into Hebrew and then using a Hebrew suffix on it. Idea love, right? It's ideals, right? It's cute. There's going to be a few more of these. So just pay attention. I thought it was great. So all of them have now come to the point where they're able to express fully their ideals. V'chulam holchim umitmazgim. They all come now and blend meziga ruchanit, a spiritual blending. Lenahar, and form a river, plagim shel shtifak sichlit, that forms waves of intellectual waves, of intellectual pouring. Ritzonit mitaderet, form that all flow from the will. Mikulot mayim rabim adirim mishberayam adir b'maram Hashem. And what Rav Kook is saying is that this pasuk from Tehillim Tzadi Gimel is embodying this idea, right? For all more powerful than the flowing waves of the sea, God is more powerful up above. Meaning the power of God is being equated to the flowing waves. What's the power of God in the flowing waves? It's this flow. It's this flow of all the specificities forming a collective that becomes indiscernible in its particular parts. Something that I heard from this the second time quoting with Moshe Zatzal this evening we were quoting him before when we were learning the Rambam, that he points out that the word mayim has no singular form. There's no singular of mayim in Lashon HaKodesh. It's plural. The word, there's no, right? There's no water and waters. There's just mayim, water plural, meaning water by its very nature is something that is made up of multiple things coming together. And in light of this, why is that? Because this underlying characteristic of water is that it has a flow. Water has a flow, and they are all the flow that comes out of how he says shtifa sichlit ritzonit. It is all the flow that is initiated from the will and the intellect. So it's like if you can imagine that a human being, the structure of the human being is a flow. The human being in and of itself is a flow, and the flow starts from the will and then flows through all the different stages of expression. Hamem b'tzurato hamichtavit. So it gets a little bit complicated over here, but he says that that this idea of the different parts blending into each other, the mezigah, is expressed in the very way that the mem is written. B'tzior shel harkavat bet v'chaf shebechalko hagadol harishon hayemani. The right part, meaning the two parallel lines and the vertical line that connects them, that whole right side structure, okay, is a cross between a bet and a kaf. So it's like a bet and a kaf kind of superimposed onto each other, a bet and a kaf at the same time. So mora pu'ulato cheftzit umachshavtit pu'ula va'ashira b'koach hakefi sheba. You catch that one? Hakefi, kefi, like kef, like. That's word play number 2. Yeah. So the power of the kaf within it symbolizes, if you remember from our discussion in kaf, that the primary theme of the kaf is the measuring, or the balancing rather, that takes place in the intellect, right, of a measured response or a thoughtful response of balancing two things against each other. So that's the power of the kaf that is within the mem. Kibul l'rishimot elyonot, being a vessel for all of the messages that come from on high. Hamitgalot al yedei hamifalim mitzad habetiut, the betiut, right? The bet aspect, right? Word game number 3, or right? So the bet power is the power of receiving. Why do you need the power to receive? Because there's a flow. So he's saying that one aspect of the flow is being in balance, of not letting one extreme take over. The other part of the balance is being open and dynamic. We've talked about this idea of the dynamism, the spiritual dynamism, of not being rigid, right? Of being able to just receive, like be open to receiving. Like you're standing there waiting for the ball to be thrown to you, so to speak. If you're not open, if your arms aren't open, then you're not going to catch the ball when it comes, even if you don't know when it's coming. So there's the balance, being aware to not drift off to one extreme. That's the kaf. And then there's the beit kibul of being that open vessel or the open house, as we talked about in Ot Bet, right? So that's the other aspect. And again, these are 2 letters that are superimposed onto each other in order to form the whole right structure of the mem. Hitachdut hamif'al v'harishumim ha'atzili shel kabbalat ha'ara hasichlit merosh tzurim. They combine together, the bet and the chaf, in order to be receptacles for the light of the intellect, which is coming down to them from the high mountains. High mountains being a euphemism for the highest places of inspiration, i.e. the will, as he said before. Shtifa ritzonit. It's a flow coming that originates from the will. Al yedei shetef hachayim, this flow of life, mimokor ta'atzumotam, this flow of life that originates from its powerful, mighty source. That is all being alluded to in the vav, which is the left part of the structure. You can see clearly that there's like a vav there on the left side. Yeah, hamitchaber el hachelak hayisodi shel hakaf beti shelo. Got that? It's great, right? Hakaf beti. Yeah, the kaf bet together, the kaf betness of the letter. So the vav, when we talked about before, the vav, one of the elements of the vav is that it's mechaber, right? It ties 2 things together. So it's right in Rav Kook's conception, there are 3 elements, 3 different letters that come together in order to make the mem, which in and of itself goes together with this flow concept of mizigah, of blending. That there are 3 different structures that blend together in order to make the letter, and those 3 letters describe the concepts of what flow is. That the balance, not drifting off to an extreme, being open to receiving, and vav, of different elements being able to work in tandem to each other. So those three elements are now blended together in order to express the very theme of blending. Yeah. Huh? It's kaf bettiness, yes. Right. We all have to commune with our kaf bet, with our kaf bettiness. Yeah. Our inner kaf betty. Our inner kaf bettiness, yes. המאמר שימצא פתח לשטף האורה המסוגרת בתוך המפעליות. The ma'amar, so again, he's using again this word ma'amar, which again, I don't think it means an utterance. I think it means a statement, right? Like a coherent statement is by definition a long form thing. It takes several sentences and perhaps several paragraphs in order to iterate. So it requires this element of flow, of let's say progression. שימצא פתח לשטף האורה המוסגרת בתוך המפעליות והרישום האצילי לחדור מחוג לחוג. He's saying that this flow is a thing in and of itself. That's choder. It traverses. מחוץ לחוג המגביל את ההוויות המאמר וערכו. That it doesn't stay within one particular statement or form. Let's say it flows between the forms. So the mem is the idea of flowing between the forms in order to make a coherent ma'amar. On the top, he's referring to the top left of the mem, which is the small connection, the narrow connection, the fine connection between the right structure, the kaf bet structure, and the vav structure. Which are revealed in the way of a side expression, hatzad hasmali shabahavaya, which is the left side of being. Again, as we've said a few times, the difference between the right and the left, especially when we're talking about letters, is that the right connotes source and the left connotes the progression or the outward movement of the thing. So it starts with the first aspect, so to speak, of this flow concept is the kaf bet together, and then moving out is the vav aspect of the flow, which allows the different components to connect with each other, or as Rav Kook says, lachdor, right? To be able to it's like almost to form an incursion, right? Between things. Which allows the ma'amar, the statement, to be revealed in its splendor and its strength. There will remain an opening on the top. Now, I'm not exactly sure what he's referring to, an opening on the top, because there doesn't seem to be an opening on the top. That from there its lofty light will break through. That this light is hovering over all things and leaving its mark upon them. And reveals itself in the book and the telling over of the story. So again, he's using this imagery of saying that the concepts are able to move from the text itself to the ear of the listener. The difference between the book and the story is that the book is just a dormant object sitting on the shelf, and when you tell over the content of the book, that becomes the story that people are able to hear. I think, now that I'm thinking about it, I think perhaps what he's referring to with this pticha el yonah, the top opening, I think what he's saying is, just like we've talked about in other letters, he differentiates between the thickness of different parts of the letters. So some parts of the letters are thick and some are intentionally supposed to be very, very thin. Like we talked about this in the bet, that the horizontal lines are very thick and the vertical line that connects them on the right side is supposed to be very thin, which connotes that it's not like such a strong partition. It's kind of like the permeable membrane. So I think what he's saying over here is that the mem is supposed to be written in the way that the right structure, the chaf bet structure, is supposed to be connected with a very, very thin line to the vav structure, which means that it's semi-permeable. It's connected, but it's semi-permeable. The ma'amar, the statement, comes with all of its values and all of its forms. The actions and the ability to receive of the whole spiritual enterprise. Yachad behi shalvam osim heim et hamizigah ruchanit. Together, their integration allows for the blending of the spirit. Hanotenet makom l'shetef, which gives space for this flow to take place. L'nar holech v'homeh, for the river to grow and get stronger with its flowing. L'chaim aruchanim, providing spiritual life. Sichlim, also life for the intellect. Life for the will. Bahamon olamim, that traverses through many worlds. Shemirov ozam yukru ach b'shetav hachlalatam, that because of their tremendous strength will be recognized in their fullness, in their wholeness. Biribuyim b'ta'atzmotam, with the multitudes that contributed to them. Again, going back to the idea that the mayim, by definition, is plural. It's like many components coming together in this flow. Kechok hamayim misyam, in the manner that water acts. Right? The manner that water acts means that there's this collective of water, and they're all flowing together in a seamless flow. Now, as you can imagine, this is all like super abstract. Even for this book, it's like pretty abstract. I mean, I found it very, very abstract, and I was thinking for a while about what exactly is the takeaway from this. What? Sure. Yes, I would love, please, feedback. I mean, or input rather. Yes.
I feel like I hear the way Rav Kook thinks coming through in his description of this letter, that he's integrating different disciplines and not letting them clash, but letting them flow together. For example, like his vision of what Israel could be as the beginning of something, although it's not apparent now, but he knows that there's a political process and there's a religious process, and let them flow together, while other people look at it and say, no, that's gonna stop it. That's not.
There's like a hard break between the different areas.
Right.
I hear you. That's very interesting. That, yes. Well, for sure, the theme of integration is for sure a big theme that Rav Kook talks about a lot. That's right. That's very, very true. In fact, I was just talking to a friend of mine about I mean, this concept about how Rav Kook used the theme of integration for his, let's say, socio-political analysis of the Jewish people, about how when you have different aspects of the nation that have been repressed for a long time, they'll end up bursting forth in a dysfunctional way because they haven't been integrated, right? Which is fascinating because this is what's called the Jungian shadow idea. He described that idea as when there's a certain aspect of the psyche that has not been allowed to develop, right? That's called the shadow. And what can happen is, what often does happen is that if it's repressed for too long, it'll burst forth in a dysfunctional way. So, like, for example, if a person doesn't have any opportunities to express aggression in a healthy way, like he never played sports, never did rough and tumble play, never had healthy forms of aggression. So, like, one day he'll be aggressive in a not friendly way, like, to put it lightly. You know, like he never integrated that. So his aggression is his shadow because it wasn't allowed to develop. So if Kook applied that, he excuse me, he doesn't quote Jung. I don't think he may not have even been aware of his work, because Jung was like literally a contemporary of his. He was a little bit younger. So I don't think he was aware of his work. He's probably a Rav Kook expert that knows the answer to that question. But he applied this idea to the idea of national awareness. Anything that has to do with nationalism being a nation, functioning like a nation, anything to do with that whole category was repressed in the Jewish people for a long time. Also due to circumstance, and also often explicitly, like there are ideas that emerged from the Jewish people over the time of exile that explicitly, let's say, belittled that domain. So it was repressed for a long time, and then one day it burst forth in a way that completely disassociated from anything else, referring to, right, the secular Zionist movement. The secular Zionist movement was pure nationalism, disassociating from anything that had to do with Torah, from tradition, with anything. Yeah.
With a heavy hand.
Right, exactly. Like with a Dafkanic approach, let's say. That's very interesting. I didn't think of that particular application, but but what I do have to say, I think, kind of dovetails what you're saying. What I have said is a little bit more. It's a bit more general, I think. You're gonna say something, Alvania? Who's gonna say something? Someone says. What? Hammer and sickle, right? Exactly. Yeah, you're not kidding. Listen. There were kibbutzim in this country, unfortunately, that like networks of kibbutzim that had pictures of Stalin hanging in their cafeterias until the 70s.
Wow.
Like, yeah, like we were like diehard communists. We're talking. But that was the thing. Thank God that we were able to outgrow that.
I kind of was thinking, as I would, completely in a different form, because Mem is Mayim.
Mhm.
There's also what's the word for completeness? Malay. It's Mem is used for that word, or to make something like him. But it's kind of like you're talking about this, sort of three sides to this, and that's the elements. That's like gas, liquid, and solid. And
different forms of matter. You're saying.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Interesting.
and to bring it all together.
Interesting.
That's how, that's maybe what MEM stands for.
Interesting.
Otherwise the world doesn't exist without all three forms.
Right. It kind of goes back to what he was saying about the integration or the flow is an element in and of itself. It's very interesting. So I'll tell you what I was thinking, and it's, again, this goes back to what we opened up with, that there seems to be this dual perspective on what a baishan means. Is it a good quality or a bad quality? So this is the idea. I read many years ago. I read a fascinating article by Malcolm Gladwell. Anyone know who that is?
Yeah.
Malcolm Gladwell wrote a very famous book called The Tipping Point. He might have wrote a few other good books. I think he's a very smart guy, very creative thinker. Unfortunately, I think he's become a bit ideologically possessed in recent years, but he was very good, maybe still is very good. And he's writing for the New Yorker for many years. And he wrote a fascinating article many years ago called "What is the difference between panicking and choking?" Not choking like, God forbid, choking on a piece of food, but when they say, like, don't choke, like, don't mess up. What is the difference between panicking and choking? Fascinating. And basically what it comes down to is that panicking is that you're not able to think, right? You've gone back to instinct, pure instinct. You don't think. You're like the frontal lobe, so to speak, is completely shut off. You can't analyze, you can't think rationally, you're just pure instinct. That's panicking. Choking is the opposite, where you become so self-aware and so focused on the micro procedures of everything that there's no flow to anything you do. That's choking. It's literally the opposites of each other. So the whole point of, and I think he hashed this out pretty well, is to talk about how success is all about balancing that thing. On the one hand, to be aware of the little micro procedures that are involved in anything that you're doing, but on the one hand, to not be so hyper focused on the micro procedures that you end up not being able to flow from one to the other seamlessly. There's a fascinating idea, and this is, I think, I really believe, the sod of understanding the two perspectives on Baishanut. That there's two types of Baishanut. Baishanut is basically self-awareness. It's self-awareness, okay, that triggers you, that keeps you in line, so to speak, okay. There's the Baishanut, self-awareness of the outside looking in, right? You are an observer of self. Being an observer of self-criticism, right? We talk about cheshbon nefesh. Person needs to be calculating, observe themselves as an object, right? And take a calculation, a hard, objective calculation. And that's not always bad to do that, right? But what's the problem? If you're experiencing self from that outside lens all the time, then it just represses you. It shuts you up. It can paralyze you. So if you're sitting in a shiur and you think, well, did I understand that correctly? And you think you want to raise your hand and ask a question, you're like, oh, what's that guy going to think? He's going to think I'm stupid. He's going to yell at me. If you think that way, you're not going to get anywhere. Lo ha-baishan lamed. You have to shut that off. You can't be a baishan all the time, because if you are, you're not going to progress. You can't be so hyper self-aware all the time. But this baishanut is something different. This baishanut is self-awareness, just experience of self. You're not a camera looking at you from the outside. You're just being. You're experiencing yourself as such. experiencing yourself as such is Yirat Hashem, the awe of the divine. It prevents you from acting in a certain way. It guides you to acting in a noble way and prevents you from going off course. Because awareness of self, that you are a divine being, that holy elevated self-awareness is the baishanut of the Jewish people inculcated at Sinai. Laman tiyeh yirato al pneihem. And that type of baishanut, that type of self-awareness of just being, again, not self-conscious, not being self-conscious, that you're like looking at yourself, hovering over yourself, looking down, right, in this hypercritical way, but awareness of self is just being. That self-awareness is this capacity of flow. Right? A very, very powerful idea that the Baal HaTanya talks about in the opening chapter of Sefer HaTanya is that he discusses the different yisodot, right? Earth, fire, wind, and water. He discusses the different elements and talks about how they are actually like archetypical forms, let's say, that embody certain traits. And what he says is that water embodies the attribute of ta'anug. Ta'anug, delight. Delight. And the fallen form of the water qualities is lustfulness, going after ta'avot, right? Or going overboard on physical pleasures, trying to fill the void, so to speak, with material things. It's that tendency. The ta'anug, there's a deep, deep need of human beings, of ta'anug, of just delight. And that's the water element within the human consciousness, because that element is just flowing. It just is. It flows. There's no rigidity to it. It is just flowing. That's all it's doing. But in itself, the quality of ta'anug is a very flowing anti-rigidity force in the human consciousness. And this is the idea of the mem/mayim, which is the flowing element within the human consciousness. The flowing element that now that all of our tsiurim, as Rav Kook puts it, all the different forms have now coalesced, now there's this additional element of allowing them to flow. And flow means not being so self-conscious all the time. That's what flowing means. If you're too hyper-focused on the individual things, there will be no flow. There will be no flow. And the mem is urging you to just be in the right lachdor mitzior l'tzior, as Rav Kook says, right? To just integrate to move from one tzior, from one form to another, right? Without focusing on each individual tzior, because you've done the work. You've mastered that technique and that technique and that, right? Now you just need to, the flowing and putting them all together is its own element, which requires a certain measure of it's almost removal, right? Of removal of that self-consciousness, of that weighty self-consciousness, that with it prevents the flow, right? Law baishan lamed. If you're too baishan, if you're too hypercritical, if you're too self-conscious all the time, you're never going to progress. Right? And we want to progress. We want to learn. We want to flow. Right? We want the ta'anug of the ratzon, the shtifa haritzonit, as Rav Kook says, the flowing of the will to be able to permeate all the different strata of our being. Bezrat Hashem.